You clicked because you suspected too, that maybe a smaller home could give you a bigger life. I chased that idea for months, and what I found flipped everything I believed about space and comfort. The French live in homes nearly half the size of American ones, and on almost every measure that touches your daily happiness, they quietly win. I didn't trust that at first. So I stood in a 58 square meter flat in Lyon, opened the refrigerator smaller than the one in my old garage, and realized I'd been sold the wrong dream for 30 years. Stay with me, because a single planning document from 2016 explains exactly why less space keeps producing more life, and it works even if you never move a single box. Let me tell you where this started, because I want you to know I came at it as a skeptic, not a believer. For most of my adult life, I measured success the way I was taught to measure it: square footage, a bigger kitchen than the last one, a spare bedroom nobody slept in, a two-car garage that slowly filled with things I bought and forgot. I believed, the way most of us were trained to believe, that more room equals more comfort, and more comfort equals a better life. Nobody ever sat me down and questioned that math. It was just the water we swam in. Then I started spending real time in France. Not tourist time, not a week in a hotel. I mean months, in ordinary neighborhoods, in ordinary buildings, watching how ordinary people actually lived, and something didn't add up. These people had less of almost everything I'd been taught to want: smaller homes, smaller kitchens, tiny closets, if they had closets at all. And yet they seemed, by every honest measure I could find, to be living better, not richer, better. That gap is what I set out to investigate. Because if it was true, it meant a lot of us have been pouring money and years into the wrong thing. So here's the first clue, and it's a big one. The average new single family home built in the United States is now around 2,400 square feet. Back in 1973, when the Census Bureau started tracking it carefully, that number was closer to 1,525 square feet. So in about 50 years, American homes grew by nearly 60%. Meanwhile, the number of people living in each home actually shrank. We built bigger and bigger boxes for fewer and fewer people. Now look at France. According to INSEE, the French National Statistics Institute, the typical French home is roughly 90 to 100 square meters. That's about 1,000 to 1,100 square feet. Less than half the size of a new American house. In the cities, it's smaller still. A family in Lyon or Bordeaux might raise 2 children in a space an American would call a starter apartment. And here is the part that stopped me cold. If more space truly produced more well-being, the French should be miserable in those small homes, and Americans should be thriving in their big ones. But when I pulled the OECD Better Life Index, the numbers pointed the other way. The French report higher life satisfaction on average than Americans do, and they live longer doing it. French life expectancy sits above 82 years. American life expectancy has fallen to around 76. That's a gap of 6 years. 6 years of your life tied somehow to how people live day to day. So the smaller home isn't a sacrifice they're suffering through. It's connected to something they're getting right. But what? That was the question that pulled me into the next round, because square footage alone couldn't explain a 6-year difference in human life. The answer started in the kitchen. And it surprised me, because it was the smallest room in the whole equation. When I first opened the French refrigerator, I honestly thought it was broken, or that it was a spare unit. It was tiny, under counter, in many homes. The kind of thing an American keeps in a dorm room or a basement bar. I remember standing there thinking, how does a family of 4 feed themselves out of this? And the answer changed how I understood the entire French way of living. They don't stockpile, they shop small and often. In most French neighborhoods, there's a bakery, a produce stand, a butcher, a cheese shop, or an open-air market within a few minutes' walk of the front door. So you don't drive to a warehouse store once a week and haul home $200 of food to cram into a giant fridge. You walk down the street most days and buy what you'll actually eat. Fresh bread, vegetables that were picked recently. Enough, not extra. That one habit ripples out into everything. Start with food waste. The typical American household throws away an enormous amount of food, roughly a third of what it buys, according to the USDA. Think about that. You work, you earn, you drive, you shop, you carry it all home, and one out of every $3 of it goes into the trash. In France, because people buy in small amounts for immediate use, that waste drops sharply. Less spoilage, less spending, less of your life spent earning money just to throw it away. Then there's your health, which is where it gets serious. When your food comes from a market you walk to, it's fresher, less processed, and portioned for a day or two, not a fortnight. The French diet is famously built on smaller portions of higher quality food. And here's a puzzle that researchers have chewed on for decades, called the French paradox. The French eat butter, cheese, bread, and rich sauces, foods we're told to fear, and yet they have historically had lower rates of heart disease and obesity than Americans do. Part of the answer isn't some magic in the food. It's the structure of daily life. Smaller kitchen, smaller fridge, daily walking to fresh sources, smaller portions eaten slowly at a table instead of shoveled in front of a screen. So the tiny fridge that made me think something was wrong was actually a signal that something was right. The small home forces a rhythm, and that rhythm quietly protects your money and your body at the same time. But I still wasn't satisfied, because a small fridge and a nearby bakery don't just appear by accident. Something had to make that possible, something in how the whole neighborhood was built. And when I found what it was, I understood that the real difference between these two ways of living wasn't about France at all. It was about a design choice, one you can actually test where you sit right now. Here's the clue that cracked it open for me. In 2016, a French-Colombian professor named Carlos Moreno, based at the Sorbonne in Paris, put a name to something the French had been living for centuries. He called it La ville de quart d'heure, the 15-minute city. The idea is almost embarrassingly simple. Everything you need for a good daily life, groceries, a doctor, a pharmacy, a school, a park, a cafe, work if possible, should sit within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of your home. Now, the reason this matters so much to my investigation is that it exposes the real trick behind the small French home. The home is small because it doesn't have to hold your whole life. In America, we compensate for isolated houses by making the house do everything. You need a giant kitchen because the nearest fresh food is a 15-minute drive away, so you must store 2 weeks of it. You need a home gym because there's nowhere to walk to. You need a home office, a home theater, a spare, everything, because the house is an island and the world is far away. The bigger the distance around you, the bigger the box has to be to make up for it. The French home is small because the neighborhood is big. Your kitchen can be tiny when the market is downstairs. Your home doesn't need an entertainment wing when there's a cafe on the corner and a park at the end of the street. The city carries the weight the house would otherwise have to carry, and this is where the numbers turned undeniable. Look at how people move. In the United States, according to census data, the vast majority of daily trips happen by car, and something like 90% of workers commute by automobile. In France and across much of Europe, walking, cycling, and public transit make up a huge share of everyday movement. That's not just an environmental footnote. That's exercise built silently into a normal day. The average French person accumulates real physical activity simply by living, walking to the bakery, to the station, to the school gate. The average American accumulates it by driving to a gym and paying a membership to walk on a machine, if they do it at all. So one group pays for a bigger house to store the life they have to drive to. The other group lives in a smaller house because the life comes to them on foot. And their bodies, their wallets, and their lifespans all show the difference. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I thought it too. You're thinking, that's lovely, Elena, but I'm not moving to France. I'm in my 60s or my 70s. I own my home, my family is here, my roots are here, and I am not about to sell everything and start over in a country where I don't speak the language. And I want to stop and talk to you directly because this next part is for you, and it might be the most useful thing in this entire video. You do not have to move to France to claim almost all of this because the real ingredient was never France. It was proximity. It was the 15-minute idea, and you can measure your own life against it this week from exactly where you're sitting. If you want to go deeper on exactly how to map the places that matter most in your own daily life, I've written about this framework in detail in my book, Map First, Deep Map, and GeoEdge. Each walk you through the practical tools I use to score neighborhoods before making any decision about where to live. The links are in the description below, and honestly, the mapping exercises alone are worth it before you ever talk to a real estate agent. I built these books specifically for people who want the evidence in their hands, not just a feeling. Here's how I want you to test it, and it costs you nothing. Take a piece of paper, write down the things you actually need in a normal week. A grocery store, a pharmacy, your doctor, a park or somewhere green to walk, a place to sit that isn't your own living room, a cafe, a library, a community center, a friend or family member. Now, for each one, honestly, write down how you get there and how long it takes. Not how long you wish it took, how long it really takes, door to door. When I did this exercise for my own old home, the one I was so proud of, I got a shock. Almost nothing was within a 15-minute walk. Everything required a car. And that meant that on any day I couldn't or didn't want to drive, my world shrank to the four walls of that big, beautiful house. The size of the house was hiding the smallness of the life it sat inside. Now here's the part that matters for you specifically, especially as we get older. There will very likely come a day when driving gets harder or stops. And on that day, the 15-minute question becomes the single most important fact about where you live. A person who lives within a short walk of a shop, a clinic, and a green space keeps their independence and their dignity for years longer. A person marooned in a large house at the end of a long driveway, dependent on a car they can no longer safely drive, loses their freedom the moment the keys go away. Nobody puts that in the real estate brochure. But it may be the truest thing about a home you'll ever measure. So even if you never move, this changes what you optimize for. If you're thinking about downsizing, and many of you are, don't just look at the house. Score the neighborhood on the 15-minute test before you sign anything. A smaller home in a walkable town will very likely give you more actual life than a larger home somewhere you must drive for every single need. And if you're staying exactly where you are, you can still tilt the balance. You can deliberately anchor more of your week within walking distance. You can shop smaller and more often at the closest place instead of one big haul. You can find the nearest green space and make it a daily habit. You are borrowing the French rhythm without the French passport. But there was still one piece missing from my investigation. Because if the smaller, closer, walkable life is so obviously better for our health, our money, and our freedom, then somebody, somewhere, made a choice to build the opposite. And around the 3/4 mark of my research, I finally found out who and why, and it made me genuinely angry. Here's the thing nobody told us. The oversized, car-dependent, isolated home wasn't an accident of taste. It was engineered. After the Second World War, American policy, highway money, and the housing and car industries pushed hard for a very particular model of living, spread out. Single-use zoning, meaning homes here, shops way over there, offices somewhere else entirely, all separated and reachable only by car. The bigger the house and the farther the drive, the more everyone in that chain profited. More lumber, more appliances, more square footage to furnish, more cars, more fuel, more of everything. Your bloated house was a product, and so was your commute. And the story that got wrapped around it was seductive. The bigger house was sold to us as the American dream, as success, as the reward for a life of hard work. Nobody advertised the loneliness of the cul-de-sac. Nobody mentioned that the same design that felt like freedom at 40 would feel like a prison at 75. Nobody added up the decades of car payments, the gym memberships to replace the walking we designed out of our lives, the food we wasted, or the 6 years of life expectancy quietly slipping away. The French, by contrast, never fully demolished their older pattern. Their towns and cities were built long before the car, around the human being on foot, around the market square and the neighborhood church, and the shop on the ground floor with an apartment above it. And crucially, they made choices to protect that. There's even a piece of French history people love to cite, the old tax and building traditions that shaped those tall wardrobes, the armoires, instead of built-in closets, and kept homes efficient and modest rather than sprawling. Whatever the exact truth of each old story, the pattern is real. The French kept building for the person walking out the front door. We built for the car pulling out of the garage. And two completely different qualities of daily life grew out of those two choices. So this was never France versus America as places. It was one design philosophy versus another. Proximity versus distance. The human on foot versus the human in traffic. And once I saw it that clearly, I finally understood the last clue, the one that turns this whole investigation into something you can act on this week. Let me hand you the verdict now, because you earned it by staying with me, and it's better than I expected when I started digging. I went back to Carlos Moreno's work and to the data behind the 15-minute city, and I found the number that ties everything together. Researchers who study this have found that the single strongest everyday predictor of well-being in a neighborhood isn't the size of the homes, or the income of the residents, or even the beauty of the buildings. It's the number of daily destinations a person can reach on foot. Count the useful places, a shop, a cafe, a clinic, a park, a friend, that you can walk to in 15 minutes. That count, more than your square footage, more than almost anything on a listing sheet, tracks with how satisfied, how healthy, and how independent people actually are. That's the secret. And here's why it's such good news for you. It means the lever that controls your daily happiness was never the thing the market kept selling you. It was never more space. It was more proximity. And proximity is something you can measure yourself for free this week without a real estate agent, without a mortgage, without moving to another country. So this is what I want you to do. Do the walking count I described. Get your real number. If it's high, you're already living the French secret, and you should protect that fiercely and never trade it away for mere square footage. If it's low, you now know the truest question to ask about any future home, the one nobody in the industry wants you asking. Not how many bedrooms, not how big the kitchen, but how many of the things that make a day good can I reach on my own 2 feet? Ask that, and you can build the better everyday life the French stumbled into centuries ago, whether you stay right where you are or move a single town over to somewhere you can walk. The French didn't get something we can't have. They just never let it be taken from them. And now that you can see it, no brochure, no listing, no glossy advertisement for more space you'll have to drive to can fool you again. Here's what I feel, standing on the other side of this investigation. I feel a little robbed, honestly, thinking about the years I spent chasing more room when what I actually wanted was more life closer to hand. But mostly I feel free because now I know exactly what to measure, and so do you. You're someone who wants the evidence, not the advertisement. You want to know what's actually true about where and how you live, even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it means admitting we were all sold the wrong dream. That's why you made it to the end of this, and that's the kind of person this whole channel is for. So let me ask you something specific, and I really do want your answer. Do the 15-minute walking count for your own home right now, and tell me your number in the comments. How many useful places, a shop, a doctor, a park, a friend, Can you reach on foot in 15 minutes? Drop that number below and tell me what town, what country, what corner of the world you're watching from. I read these, and I promise you the range of answers will surprise all of us. And if you want to keep pulling threads like this, stay with me, because my next investigation puts two so called retirement paradises head to head, and the one everyone recommends turns out to hide a cost that doesn't show up until your third year there. I found it buried in the local tax records, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Come find out with me. Because we don't take the reputation's word for it, we check. Let me go back for a moment, because I want to make sure you don't walk away thinking this is only about walking to a bakery. It runs deeper than convenience, and I need you to see how deep, so the verdict really lands and stays with you. Think about what a home is actually for. We tell ourselves it's for comfort, for family, for rest, but somewhere along the way, in the American model at least, the home stopped being a base for living and started being a container for stuff and a shelter from a world we designed to be hostile to walking. The bigger the house got, the more it announced that everything worth having was inside it and everything outside required an engine and a key. And that quiet message, repeated over decades, reshapes a person. It makes you an occupant of a building instead of a member of a place. The French home says the opposite thing every single day. It's small on purpose, or at least small by necessity, and that smallness gently pushes you out the door and into the life of the street. You go get your bread not only because your fridge is little, but because going out is the point. You run into your neighbor, you nod at the shopkeeper who knows your name. You sit at a cafe, not because you're wealthy, but because the cafe is right there, and sitting in public is a normal, affordable, daily human thing. The small home produces a big social life almost as a side effect. The large home, marooned at the end of its driveway, produces isolation as a side effect, no matter how good your intentions. And loneliness, we now know from a mountain of public health research, is not a soft problem, it is a hard one. Prolonged isolation has been linked to outcomes as serious as smoking. For people in our age group especially, the difference between a neighborhood that pulls you out into daily contact and a house that seals you in can genuinely be the difference between a long, connected old age and a short, lonely one. When I lined that up against the 6-year life expectancy gap I mentioned earlier, it stopped feeling like a coincidence. The small, close, walkable life isn't just more pleasant. It appears to be, quite literally, life extending. The design of your days is a health intervention you either receive or you don't. That's the thing the brochures can never sell you, because you can't put it in a square footage number or a granite countertop. You can't stage it for an open house. It only shows up in how a real week actually feels, in whether your world expands when you open your front door or shrinks to the walls around you. So when I say the French prove you can improve everyday life with less, I don't mean less in the sense of doing without. I mean less house and more life. Less space to clean, to heat, to fill, to pay for, and more contact, more movement, more freshness, more independence, more of the actual texture of a good day. They traded square footage they didn't need for proximity. They use every single hour they're awake. And that trade, multiplied across a lifetime, is why the person in the 90 square meter flat in Lyon may well outlive and out-enjoy the person in the 2,400 square foot house at the end of the cul-de-sac. I keep coming back to that little refrigerator, the one I thought was broken. It wasn't broken. It was honest. It was telling me the truth about a whole way of living, if only I'd known how to read it. It said, you don't need to store your life in here, because your life is out there, waiting, close by, within reach. And once I finally understood that, I couldn't look at a big empty American kitchen the same way again. All that space, and so far to go for anything real. Here's the last thing I'll leave you with, and then I want your number in the comments. The industry that profited from selling us distance is still selling it. Every listing that leads with square footage and never once mentions what's within walking distance is repeating the old trick. Every advertisement that equates a bigger house with a better life is hoping you never do the 15-minute count, because the moment you do, their entire pitch falls apart. You now hold the one measurement they don't want you using. Guard it. Use it. Teach it to the people you love who are thinking about where to spend their next chapter. Because a better everyday life was never hiding in more rooms. It was hiding in how close you live to the things that make a day worth having. The French didn't invent that. They just refused to forget it. And now, neither will you. Do the count. Tell me your number. Tell me where you're watching from. And come with me to the next investigation, where the paradise everyone recommends turns out to charge a price that only appears in year 3. We check the evidence, so we never get sold the dream again. I'm Elena. If something moved you today, I'd love for you to stay close. Inside the Wandering Map Society, I pick up right where we stopped, walking you through the full French planning document, room by room. You can ask me your own questions, and a real person answers, myself. You'd belong among thousands of armchair travelers just like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen and cancel anytime. One click.